two, one. We are live.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Everyone on the outreach, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us. Sorry we're a little late. I started out with everyone in the room with a couple of disclaimers. And so we're going to jump in Matthew 24, and we're going to start where I think Curtis or Robert left off with Matthew 24:15. So if you'll turn to Matthew 24:15. Now, I will warn you, we're only going to cover one verse today, and that's Matthew 24:15. And the disclaimers that I gave everybody in the room before we got started was, everything I'm going to talk about is solely my opinion, and so I'm not just basically speaking about this as, oh, I'm the authority and I'm right, and everything I say is absolutely what was Yahshua was intended for this. No, this is just how I understand it, and this is my opinion. So no need to debate with me about it. You know, you don't have to pull me aside and tell me I'm wrong. I'll love your feedback, but I'm still open to any other opinions on this particular verse outside of that. Second disclaimer I want to give is, in order to get the full context, specifically the historical context of what we're talking about in Matthew 24:15, I will be utilizing the Apocrypha book of First Maccabees, Apocrypha book of First Maccabee, and to give the example of why Yahshua said what he said and kind of what the actual disciples would have been thinking when he said this. And so the last disclaimer is, what did I say? I can't remember. There's one more. Oh yeah, comments. Please keep the comments specific to the topic. No online. This is nothing new. I'm not coming up with this new revelation. I'm just putting in order what I've heard and what's been told about this particular topic in the past. I'm going to try to put it in a, pack it into a summary of better understanding for those that have never heard this to kind of grasp. And so hopefully I can pull it off, but it's a lot. 4 pages. So with that being said, the title of this, I normally don't give titles of the study, but I had to on this one. The title of this one is The Abomination of Desolation. The Abomination of Desolation. And then Curtis said, because we know that this particular topic, has intrigued theologians and scholars for centuries. Everybody's trying to understand what it really means, and, from a historical context, from spiritual apostasy to future events and relevance, everybody wants to know what this particular verse really means and want to understand it, because as we read it, that's what the actual translators say we're supposed to do. Whosoever readeth, let him understand. And whenever someone tells me, when you read this, you better understand it, it must be really important or it must be really complicated. And so that's why I said we should just dig into this one verse. Don't worry about the rest just yet. We know what the rest say, what we should do when we see it. But when I was putting this together, I was like, before we can focus on what Yahshua instructs us to do when we see it, let's figure out what it is we should be watching for. First things first. Thank you, Curtis. Because if we think the abomination of desolation is one thing, but it is something totally different, and we start running for the hills, we might be running when we shouldn't be running.
Or towards it.
Yeah, we might be running towards it, right? And so today, let's look at Daniel's actual abomination of desolation vision. We're going to talk about Yahshua and how he wanted them to reference the abomination of desolation from a historical and a future prophecy standpoint. And then we're going to look at how we should look at it from a future events as well. And so those are 3 things I want to try to unpack today. The first is, when Yahshua mentioned this verse, what did the apostles think about? And then when he mentioned it, what was he trying to tell them to beware of or look for that was coming in the future? And then when we look at it, what do we look at it for? We look at it for the previous historical events, which were 2 of them, and then we also look for a future event that is to come. That is a lot to unpack in an hour. So without further ado, we're going to jump into this. So let's read Matthew 24:15 first. Let's get that out of the way. Matthew 24:15 says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand." And I'll stop there because I don't want to go any further. We know he says, "Flee, those in Judea flee to the mountain," after this, but I want to do two things before we even get started. Number one, abomination of desolation is a very obscure phrase, and so we have to define this phrase first, make it better to understand what it really means. So we got to define the words, right? And defining the words, the two words here are abomination and desolation. So the definition of abomination is a thing that causes disgust or hatred. A thing that causes disgust or hatred. And so the first thing I think in my mind is, what is abominable to Yahweh? What is an abomination to Yahweh? Proverbs 6:16. Yes, so let's start at Proverbs 6:16. It was right on the tip of Sister Quran's tongue. So Proverbs 6:16, and matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and read it. I have the list here, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Proverbs 6:16. So, if it's an abomination of desolation, what is an abomination? And my first thing to think of is, what is abomination to Yahweh? And it says in Proverbs 6, verse 16, "These 6 things doth Yahweh hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among his brethren." Those are abomination to Yahweh. Now, we know that there are other things that are abomination to Yahweh, like,
That's quite a package.
Yeah, yeah, we're not going to go into the food laws and other stuff that's abomination, but specifically thinking about these 6 things being an abomination to Yahweh, let's think about those things when we say the phrase, an abomination of desolation. Because I'm going to give you why I'm saying this in a minute, but to define desolation, or, to destroy is a state of complete emptiness or destruction. And so how I unpack this in my mind so I can better understand it, it is when you see the outpouring of things that Yahweh hates, when you see the outpouring of things that Yahweh hates, which we just listed out, there should come one that will cause complete destruction. Abomination of desolation. So when you see the things that Yahweh hates, then after that, you're going to see something that totally destroys, or someone that totally destroys. That is how I think about abomination of desolation. It makes it easier to kind of unpack what we're about to go through, because as we think about Daniel's historical context, Yeshua's future prediction of what will happen in the temple and what will happen in the future, we have to think about when we see the things that Yahweh hates, the abominations that Yahweh finds disgusting, after that we should see someone or something that destroys his people, whatever his glory is, anything that's related to him. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Proverbs 8:13 says, "The fear of Yahweh," 8:13 of Proverbs, "is to what? To hate evil, pride, and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the perverse," actually it says froward, but perverse mouth do I hate.
Right.
So that's rather condensed specific, speaking of unpacking things.
Yeah, and I'm going to stick to this list because this list actually plays into what we will read about in what happened during the time of the Maccabean revolt and as well as the 70 AD destruction of the temple. So again, a lot to unpack, but I'm going to try to tie all of this stuff together. All right, so Abomination of Desolation, in my mind, when you see things that Yahweh hates, there shall come one or something that causes complete destruction after that. So when we see a proud look, lying tongue, shedding of innocent blood, a wicked heart, feet that run to mischief, false witness, and sowing discord, we should see complete destruction after that. Yes, Curtis.
Actually, all that rolled up into a package is what adds up to actually what went on inside the temple at an earlier time period. Because we got a
Hold that thought.
you got Ezekiel in your notes?
I think I got Ezekiel, but I don't know if I have 8. But let me get through this first, and then if you derail me, I'll never recover from this one. All right, so I'm not saying don't give comments, but let me, if I don't say it in the section I'm about to talk about in 3 sections, and I have 3 sections, historical context of when Yeshua made this phrase, what did the apostles and disciples think about? Because they never came back with, well, what do you mean by that? Because me, when he said this, I would have been like, what? What do you mean? Because I don't know the historical context. And then I'm going to talk about the reason he said it is because 70 AD. And then we're going to talk about future. If I don't mention Ezekiel, please try to remember it, and then we can discuss it then. All right, so historical context. The phrase abomination of desolation is mentioned 3 times in Daniel. It's mentioned in Daniel 9:27, then in Daniel 11:31, and then finally in Daniel 12:11. So in my mind, I always thought that abomination of desolation was only mentioned once in Daniel. But doing this study, I found it's 3 separate times. And since seeing that it's 3 separate times, I was like, okay, I remember it's in 3 different places, so it all means the same thing. It's all talking about the same event, right? Not really, in my opinion. So, like I said, most believe that these verses are pointing to the desecration of the temple, and specifically by Antiochus, thank you. Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who was a Greek king during the time of the Maccabean revolt. So they think that it's based on that particular period, but also it can be referenced as the destruction of the temple by Titus in 70 AD. But then we're also going to talk about future. So to unpack the 3 different verses that are mentioned about abomination of desolation in Daniel, let's look at all 3 and see what those actual verses really point us to. Because I love the fact that Yeshua said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, he didn't say which one of the verses. He just basically said, when you see it, run for the mountains. So we gotta think like the actual apostles or disciples sitting at his feet when he was saying this. So historical context, yes, Q.
What were the 3 scriptures for Daniel?
We're going to go over them. The first is Daniel 9:27. Mm-hmm. Second is Daniel 11:31.
And 12:11, right?
And Daniel 12:11.
Okay.
All
I
right.
want to make sure.
All right. So let's look at historical context. And Curtis, I think what you were about to mention is we've had the destruction or things that have happened in the temple several times in the past. And so we have the Babylonians that came and took over everything. We have, the Maccabeans. We have 70 AD. We have Pompeii, and I think it was 63 AD, or 63 BC. So several times the temple has been ransacked. However, we have to be more specific of in the context and how the actual temple was destroyed or taken over, or the city was taken. And so the first one I want to really point of is when Yeshua made this proclamation, what would the actual disciples would have first thought? I think, my opinion, that they would have immediately gravitated to the Maccabean revolt, because let's read what happened during that revolt and compare it to what Daniel says in his vision about the abomination of desolation. So the historical context for Antiochus, I can't get that dude's name right. Antiochus was in 143 BC. Antiochus invaded Jerusalem and captured the city and took all of the gold and silver and all of the precious things back to his land, which I'm assuming was Greece. After 2 years, he sent his chief collector, his chief tax collector, to the city with basically notions of peace, and through that he destroyed the walls, the houses, and set fire to the city. Now all of this can be actually illustrated in 1 Maccabee 1, 29 to 37. I'm not going to read all of Maccabee 1, 1 Maccabee 1, because it tells of the entire account. I'm just going to give you guys certain inserts because those actually play a part into Daniel's vision. So in 1 Maccabee 1:29, it says, after 2 years fulfilled or were fully expired, the king sent the chief collector of tribute unto the city of Judah, who came unto Jerusalem with a great multitude, and spake peaceable words unto them. But all was deceit. For when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city and smote it very sore and destroyed much people of Israel. And when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire and pulled down the houses and the walls thereof on every side. And so I'll stop right there. This is, again, 1 Maccabee 1:29 through 31. So we have an instance to where Antiochus invaded Jerusalem, took everything back, sent his tax collector to Judea. They would not let him in the city, but he said, peaceable words. He flattered them. It was all deceit so that he can get into the city. And as soon as they let him in, he destroyed it. All right, I got that in my brain now. So after Antiochus' people established a permanent base in the city of David, Antiochus declared one religion, the Hellenistic religion, and then his men actually enforced this one religion by taking away the sacrifice. Sounds pretty familiar. This is illustrated in 1 Maccabee 1:44 through 50. And 1 Maccabee 1:44 through 50 says, for the king had sent a letter by messenger unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judea, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbade the burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and feast days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should all also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable, with all manners of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinance. And whosoever would not do according to the commandments of the king, he said he should die. All right, so we got Antiochus came in, took the city, left, sent his chief collectors, said that everybody's going to follow Hellenistic religion, and whoever didn't do this would be killed. And at the same time, his people, his men, his army, and this chief tax collector took away the sacrifice and the burnt offerings and drink offerings. All right. After this, they defiled the temple by, it said, and I think this is in Josephus, I didn't get a chance to actually review this one. They defiled the temple by erecting a statue of Zeus and started sacrificing pigs on the altar of incense, which symbolized the ultimate act of blasphemy and sacrilege against Yahweh. again, this is what the actual disciples, when they heard, remember abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, this is what they would have thought about. So I'll read the last part of this really quick. First Maccabee 1:54 gives us an illustration of the abomination of desolation, and it actually calls it out by name. First Maccabee 1:54 says, "Now the 5th day of the month of Caslu, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altars and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah and every side, and burnt incense of the doors of their houses and in the streets. And when they had rent the pieces of the books of the law which they found, they burned them with fire. And whosoever was found with any of the books of the testament, or if any committed to the law, the king's commandment was that they would be put to death. Thus did they, by the authority of the Israelites every month." And I wanted to point that out. This is what the armies did with the authority of Antiochus to all of the Israelites every month, to as many were found in the cities. Now the 5 and 20th day of the month, they did sacrifice upon the idols of the altar, which was upon the altar of Elohim, at which time, according to the commandments, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised, and they hanged the infants about their necks, and rifled their houses, and slew them that had circumcised them. Now, I left that part in there because when Yeshua said to them, "When you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet," they, my opinion, they would have immediately thought about this, because this is actually what Hanukkah was built on. The actual celebration of Hanukkah was based on the Maccabean revolt, because after this, Judah and Jerusalem and the Israelites rebelled against the tax collector and the army that was in the city. But we're not going to talk about that. So in my mind, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet that Yeshua is trying to point them to is this occurrence of how the Greeks came in and basically did the things that Yahweh hates, the abomination, and then they made his people desolate, or they destroyed his people for it, shedding innocent blood through lying tongues and mischief and false witness, sowing discord between the people. Now, the discord you're going to find is there were some people that openly agreed to follow the king's law, and then there were some people that rebelled, Maccabean revolt, and did not want to do these things. And so those things that Yahweh hates, the proud look, the lying tongue, the shedding of innocent blood, the wicked heart, the feet running to mischief, the false witness, and the sowing discord, can all be found in the account of Maccabees in regards to this revolt, which was prophesied by Daniel. So let me stop there and kind of unpack this so far. And these particular events, it did provoke the actual Israelites to revolt and rebel against the Greeks. They didn't run away and flee. And so that's the difference that I see from Yeshua's saying, abomination of desolation, remember that. And when you see it, flee to the mountains, and what actually happened here. So any questions up until this point on the historical context? Really impactful, especially the part about if a mother had their child circumcised and they found out, they would kill the child and hang it around his neck, and they had to wear it as a sign of intimidation, disrespect, or whatever. Just evil, right? All right.
You get to a point where you can't realize how absolutely awful some people can be.
Awful. That sounds very awful
It
to me.
really gets bad.
Right. So when I mention that, when you see the outpouring of things Yahweh hates, there shall come one who will cause complete destruction after that. That was my case for that. 1 Maccabee 1. So now, since we've read the account of what really happened, let's look at the vision in Daniel 11:19. We're going to start in Daniel 11:19. Because we have to start in Daniel 11:19 before we get to Daniel 11:31. I'm not going to read all the way down to Daniel 11:31, but I want to actually set the stage starting at Daniel 11:19. We're going to read a couple of verses, and then we're going to go to Daniel 11:31, and then we're going to read a couple of verses and think about the story in which we just read of what happened during Antiochus taking over of Jerusalem. All right, I'll wait till everybody gets there because these verses are actually talking about the king of the north and the king of the south, and they're going back and forth, but I really just want to focus on these few verses because it just stuck out to me to be a little different.
Daniel what?
Daniel 11, verse 19. That's where we're going to start. So Daniel 11:19 breaks into the thought of the king of the north was defeated by the king of the south. And then this is what it says about the king of the north. In Daniel 11:19, then he shall turn his face towards the ford of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Verse 20, then shall stand up in his state a raiser of taxes, and the glory of the kingdom, meaning in Jerusalem, I'm assuming, but within a few days he shall be destroyed. Not this raiser of taxes, but I'm talking about the king of the north will be destroyed. Neither in anger nor in battle, meaning he didn't get killed fighting, he got killed basically from some other reasons. Verse 21, here's where it's really important. And in his state shall stand a vile person to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And I'll stop right there. So the question I was like, who is this raiser of taxes that's going to come up in the stead of the king? He's going to be a vile person, and he's going to come in the kingdom through peaceable flatteries. Does that kind of remind you of what we just talked about as the chief collector of tribute came to the city? They wouldn't let him in, so he peaceably deceived them to get in the city and then utterly destroyed it. One fun fact here is Antiochus died of an illness in Persia. He didn't die through anger or through a battle. He just died because he contracted the disease, kind of following suit on the actual vision, but that's a side note. All right, let's go down to Daniel 11:31 now, and here's what I really wanted to talk about. I just threw that I found it interesting that the person that took the king's place was a raiser of taxes, and it kind of goes back to the Maccabean account of what happened. But Daniel 11:31, here's my point. Daniel 11:31, let's read where it talks about the abomination of desolation. Daniel 11:31, in talking about the king of the north, it says, and arms shall stand on his parts. Now, what does that really mean? And arms shall stand on his part. I read that as an army is going to actually stand in his authority to do whatever he tells. And the reason why I say that is because let's keep reading. So it says, and arms shall stand in his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. It says they, not he. And shall take away the daily sacrifice. So they will pollute the sanctuary and take away the daily sacrifice. And they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. And what I'm pointing out here is I highlighted the word they. Because in the account of Antiochus, he sent a message to them for one religion, Hellenistic religion, and then the army executed based on his authority to take away the daily sacrifice and to set up the abomination of desolation. And then it goes on in verse 32, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall be corrupted by flatteries. And he basically deceived them by peace to actually get into the kingdom. But the people that do know their Elohim shall be strong and do exploits. Meaning, during the Maccabean revolt, those that stuck to the actual law and commandments of Yahweh actually revolted and took back the kingdom from these or they or this army. Yes, in my mind, it lines up. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by famine and be captive and be spoiled many days. And so, yes, we know that that happened. Those that stood up to the army of Antiochus were captive, they were killed, they were burned with flame by sword, they were spoiled many days until they revolted and took back the city. So I'll stop there. Any questions? Because I just threw a lot out really fast. Yes, Larry.
It's more of a comment. So, going through this historical aspect, a century and a half, you know, literally
Yes.
150 years or so before the Messiah, these are things that had happened, and it was shaping the political world that would be in place by the time Yahshua was on
came.
the scene.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Curtis.
Actually, we got something very similar that happens concerning the king that was supposed to die, but not in battle, nor in anger.
Yeah.
Later. Actually, we got a foretelling of this kind, if you will, a pattern of a very similar event happened in the time of Hezekiah in 2 Kings 19, verses 35 through 37. And it came to pass, this is right after the defeat of Sennacherib, when the angel of Yahweh slew 185,000 Assyrian men. And it came, well, I forgot my glasses, I can't read this hardly. And it came to pass, I'll try Bob's, thank you, Bob. Oh, no.
Yeah, no.
And it came to pass on a certain night that the angel of Yahweh went out and killed the captive Assyrians, 185,000. When the people arose in the morning, of course, we're all dead. And so Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went away and returned home. So Sennacherib himself wasn't killed yet. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went away, returned home and remained in Nineveh. Verse 37. And it came to pass while he was worshiping in the temple of Nisroch that some of his sons, Adrimelech and Sharesh, struck him down with a sword, and they escaped to the land of Ararat.
Yeah. And like I
And then
said,
his youngest son ruled in his place.
yeah, like I said earlier, there are many different similarities throughout
I mean,
time.
we have little bits and pieces of patterns.
Yeah, but this, in my opinion, when you're talking about the abomination of desolation, the taking away the sacrifice and the setting up the abomination of desolation, I think there's only really one thing we can point to, or I will repeat that. There's only one thing that I can really point to, in my opinion, of what portrays all of that together. And so I think when Yahshua mentioned, when you see this abomination of desolation, flee for the mountains, and immediately when he said that, they thought about this. They thought about Daniel 11:31. Granted, wasn't any actual book or numbers to these verses back then, but they thought about this passage, and this passage took them back to what happened during the Maccabee revolt, and they could perfectly understand what he was trying to say. That's why they didn't respond back, well, what do you mean by that? Could you explain that to us? Could you tell us what this parable means? Because they did that before when they didn't understand it, but they didn't do it here because they totally understood what he was talking about. Because this event would have been burned in their society to immediately be recalled when somebody mentions the abomination of desolation. Yes, Q.
I have here that in AD 66, somewhere between 66 and 70, It was desecrated by an act of sacrilege when Jewish zealots or zealots
Zealots?
killed priests and spilled their blood in the temple and tore it down. They set up their own standards of the Roman emperor.
Yeah, I think that was Pompey. Does it say Pompey did that?
No, it says just Caesar, and they worship Caesar within the temple as a
Yeah,
god.
so Pompey was the leader, and it was on behalf of Rome at that time.
Yeah. So is that because I have the other one, Antiochus the fourth of Epiphanes. He's the one that you're referring to,
Yes.
and then I just have a second act of that. So I
Yes.
just wanted to know, is that all the same event?
So
or?
the account during 60, was it 63 or 65 BC?
I have somewhere between 66 and 70. They don't exactly.
Yeah, so what happened there is there were two princes that were trying to take over and control of Jerusalem. And one of the princes, I don't know his name, reached out to Pompey, which took over Egypt. And he tried to get him to come help him take Jerusalem. And he said he would pay him a certain amount of money. But when Pompey got there, he reneged on his deal and didn't give him all the money. So Pompey switched to the other side and helped the other prince take over Jerusalem. And once they took over Jerusalem, Pompey took over that prince and killed all of them. And he ended up taking over Jerusalem. He destroyed a lot of the city, but he did not destroy the temple. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, a little bit, you can look this up on worldhistory.org, and it says, I'll just read the paragraphs. It says, in 64 CE, Gaius Florus presided over Judea. He had the same indifference to the Jewish populace as Pilate, but did not have the political intellect to calm the tense Jewish society when things turned sour. In other words, as Josephus states, Florus was incompetent. The artificial class divide, the corruption of both the local and Senate governments in the area, and the unbridled disdain for the Jewish people brought about a riot in Caesarea in 66 CE. There, the zealots, a band of Hellenized anti-elite Jews, wiped out the Roman-backed elite Greeks that had inhabited the area. Gaius Florus, in a rage of scorn hubris, plundered the Holy Temple to fund the cult of Caesar and erected statues of Emperor Nero and himself with the money he took. This obviously enraged the Jewish people. The temple was not only the center of religious and social life of the Jewish people, but in it was a sign of God's presence of the holy city. When Florus raided the temple and ordered the residents nearby to follow his form of polytheism around it, it was the biggest insult to the Jewish religion. The Jewish people rebelled. Random attacks on Roman citizens followed throughout Judea, particularly in the northern towns. There, in the area such as Narbata, the Jewish people overthrew the Roman government. So basically, they came in, they tried to set up Nero worship, actually put a temple, put a statue of Nero in the temple, plundered it for the money. There was an uprising. Basically, in the year 66, the Roman army literally got pushed out of Jerusalem.
Right.
And so that started the ball of wax we're
Yeah.
about to talk about.
Yeah. And so again, a lot of times that these things happen, but I really want to focus on three because those traditionally, most schools of thought, most theologians believe that these particular three are the ones that are actually spoken of by Daniel. But yes, to both of those, Pompey and when the Caesar's men, they did something similar, but I want to connect the dots based on the vision from Daniel and how it describes what happened during that time. So the first one, Daniel 11:31, the armies or the arms on the part of the king, they polluted the sanctuary. They set up the abomination of desolation. They took away the daily sacrifice. I think it's different from what we're going to read here next and go about, because the next thing I want to talk about is Yeshua telling them these words, abomination, desolation. They thought about what happened during the Maccabean time. He's going to tell them, think about what's about to happen. And then since we have the information of what actually happened in 7 AD, That's the next thing. Before I go there, I almost missed this bullet point. The question that most people ask themselves when they read these things is, oh, the Maccabees, whoever wrote Maccabees, actually copied what Daniel wrote down. And so that's why it's so accurate. That's why it mentions the raiser of the taxes. That's why it says they polluted sanctuary and they said abomination of desolation. It's not because Daniel's vision was accurate. It's because the Maccabees copied what he said and put it into their book. I don't believe that at all. If Yahweh knows the end from the beginning, he gave Daniel the vision and it all happened. End of that story.
Is there a type and an anti-type, like even a future type?
We're going to get there.
I
That's the last one.
We're gonna end
You're
up
going.
so
We're
I'm
going.
trying to get my head
Yeah,
around it.
let me get there, guys. I'm not going to make it. I'm just on page 2.
Keep going.
All right. So, in my mind, this vision that Daniel had in 1131 of the army is different from Yeshua's prophecy and what happened in 70 AD. The reason being is because the Maccabees actually are, during this time, the Judeans revolted against and rose up and did exploits, whereas what we're about to talk about now, there was no uprising. Everybody was taken away or killed. And this is what happened in 70 AD. And so I'm not going to go through this in depth. I'm just going to do the points because we talked about this when I talked about the destruction of the temple. But I have to rehash it so that we can jump into Daniel 9:26. Don't turn there yet, but we're going to go to Daniel 9:26 next. But during 70 AD, the Roman general Titus surrounded Jerusalem 3 days before Passover. Because Titus besieged the Jerusalem during Passover, he allowed those that were pilgriming from the country to enter into the city, but he refused to let anybody leave. So you could come, but you ain't gonna leave. This validated Yeshua's warning to flee when you see these things and not go to the city when you see these things. The Romans destroyed the walls of the cities. They killed everybody they encountered once they actually breached the walls. They set fire to the temple. We know the story of, they think that the actual priest set fire to the porch, and then the actual armies or the soldiers start throwing fire through the windows, and that is what burned down the temple. So says Josephus. And all of the valuables were taken away to Rome. And after that, Titus commanded one of the soldiers to raise the temple to the ground. It was leveled. There was nothing else left of the temple after that. So that was the account of 70 AD summarized. So now let's look at kind of the other scriptures that are the same based on Mark and Luke of the warning of the abomination of desolation. Let's turn to Mark 13:14. Mark 13, verse 14. And cue when the CD gets to 115, the stream, not the stream, I'm sorry, the recording. When the recording gets to 115, you can stop it, but let the stream continue to play. You hear me? Okay, all right. Mark 13:14 says, and it's very similar to Matthew 24:15. Mark 13:14 says, "But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains." So we get the warning, and then we get the instructions of what to do. Again, I mentioned what I said earlier. My translation of abomination and desolation I have to think about here, because what I had translated was, when you see the outpouring of things Yahweh hates, the outpouring of things that he discussed, which we spoke of in Proverbs, there shall come one who will cause complete destruction after that. So thinking about our story of 70 AD, when they saw Titus and that army where they should not have been, they should have known that there was coming destruction after that. And the reason why I say that is in Luke 19:43. Luke 19:43. Because Luke gives a little different perspective on this verse. Luke says, Luke 19:43, for the days shall come upon thee that thine enemy will cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even to the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of your visitation. And so I'll stop there. Yahshua gives them not only the abomination desolation when you see, but when you see them compassing around about the city, then know that their visitation is at hand. So that's very specific. And he backs it up again in Luke 21:20. Luke 21:20. I know I'm going pretty fast, so bear with me, guys. Luke 21:20. In Luke 21:20, Yeshua says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee into the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. And so I'm trying to unpack this.
Kind of ties in with leave and don't look back.
Exactly. When you see Jerusalem being compassed by armies, then know that the desolation is near. So when you see the abomination or the things that Yahweh hate surrounding the city, then you know that the desolation, the total destruction is near. Those in Judea flee against the mountain. Those that are in the actual city depart, and those that are in the country enter not into. Those that are in the country were traveling to the city for Passover, and they were entering in, and they were allowed to enter in, but they were not allowed to leave. And so all of the believers that believe Yahshua's word and they flee for the mountain did not get killed. But anybody that actually went from the countryside and entered into the city, those that were in the city stayed, those that were in Judea that didn't flee to the mountain, they did not warn the signs and they were killed. Yes, Q.
This is a question. Is that why, just to go back to Matthew 24, when he gets into then let Judea flee, that's
You got to
16.
speak up, man. I can't understand.
That's Matthew 24:16. Then all of a sudden,
Yeah, we're
Matt-
not going to 16 yet. We're just still talking about the abomination desolation.
yeah, I was asking for Matthew chapter 24, verse 20, when he says, pray ye that your flight be not in
Yeah,
the
we're
winter.
not going there yet. We're going to let the next speaker talk about. We're only going to talk about 15.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Just trying to tie everything.
We're going to answer that the next speaker. So I'll
Okay.
leave that one to who's up next. Larry. Larry,
Okay.
answer the what should we do after we see these things question. I asked that of you. All right. So Yeshua's warning was not just to look for the abomination of desolation as mentioned in Matthew 24:14, but also in Luke, he's telling us to look for armies surrounding the city, or he told them to look for armies surrounding the city, which would prompt them to flee before the destructions. So I add that because when we read 24:15, everybody's focused on abomination, desolation, but we have to take the total context of what Yahshua told us through forensic statement analysis, taking all accounts into consideration. Yahshua told them when they see the armies compassed, know the desolation is about to happen, then you flee. So it wasn't when you see them actually desecrating the temple, then you start running. You see the armies, you get out of Dodge. So that's the distinction we have to think about when we think about the future aspect of this. Yes.
So what we see here, historical records, is a large Roman army came up against Jerusalem in the year 66, plundered the temple, put a statue of Nero in the temple, plundered the money, then they were literally beaten out of the city. And it was another, took 3 years to the year 70 for them to come back and actually destroy it. There was battles ongoing. What I understand from historical records is as the Roman army was being pushed out in the year 66, okay, it is some belief that this was the sign that those of the first century disciples of the Messiah recognized that, and as the Roman army fled in the year 66 being pushed out, they left right behind them and went to the mountains.
Yes.
Okay, then after that, anybody that would come, you know, they didn't go back, but, you know, there was also, you know, it became a very militant Jewish system after that, thinking, hey, we got, you know, Yahweh on our side and we're invincible. And so they barricaded themselves, they did a lot of things because they had ongoing battles for 3 years. But from what I understand, those who were footstep followers of the Messiah, they didn't return.
Right. And they heeded the warning.
They heeded the warning.
And so this back and forth, when they actually sieged the city, the siege lasted 5 months. And by the time that the Roman soldiers entered the city, there was already famine, cannibalism, murders, infighting, political. I think they were trying to take over amongst being sieged. The priest was still trying to vie for the chief seats or whatever you want to call it. So all of this is going. And when when the Romans actually entered the city, throughout this entire siege, 5 months, about 1 million Judeans died, and the rest were taken away into slavery. It would seem that this account of Titus actually taking the city fulfills Yeshua's prophecy, and it's referenced not in Daniel 11, but it's more so in Daniel 9:26. So let's turn to Daniel 9:26. This is the second, well, it's not the second time. This is the first time Daniel mentions the abomination of desolation. But in my opinion, this time reflects more of Yeshua's prophecy as opposed to Daniel 11. And I'll explain why. We're going to start in Daniel 9:26, but the verse is in 9:27. Daniel 9:26. Daniel 9:26 says, "And after 62 weeks, Messiah be cut off." And I'm not going to even talk about that time frame of 62 weeks. Don't know what that means. But I focused here on it shall Messiah be cut off. And so when Yeshua died for our salvation and rose again after 3 days, I see that as Daniel predicting Messiah being cut off. I might be wrong, but that is how I read it. But not for himself, meaning he didn't die for himself, he died for us. And the people of the prince, not Yeshua, but the people of the prince of this world, that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, which kind of lines up in 70 AD. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and to the end of the war desolations are determined. And again, this is why I think that this particular passage is talking about 70 AD. Daniel 11 is talking about the Maccabean revolt. And Daniel 9:27 says, "And he shall confirm the covenant with them for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblations to cease." This is different from Daniel 11 when it says they. This time it says he. Very specific. "And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." And so I'll stop there. The key that I see here is the difference between Daniel 11 and Daniel 9. The vision of the Maccabean revolt and the vision of 70 AD is the desolation and the taking of the sacrifice was done by one person, the he as opposed to they. And all of this is done even until the consummation. And so I had to look that word up. I know I should know what it means, but the abomination shall be made desolate until the consummation. The consummation means the marriage. What marriage? You consummate a marriage, right? So a lot of people will think, well, the consummation means when his people actually start believing in Yeshua. Or could the consummation means that there will be abomination of desolation until he returns for his bride? That is totally different from Daniel 11. Daniel 11, if I can get to it really fast, basically talks about they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. They shall take away the daily sacrifice. They shall place the abomination that makes desolate, and such that do wickedly against them. The covenant shall be corrupted. So it doesn't say that this will happen until the consummation in Daniel 11. It just basically says it will be happening by an army, and it will be happening until those that it happened to will be corrupted, and those that still believe in Elohim will be strong and do exploits. That's different from this happening until the consummation. All right, I'll stop there. Did I kind of explain the difference between those two, or am I seeing something that's not there? First one I mentioned, Daniel 11, is talking about army. Second one is talking about a person. The first one, they revolted back, stood up and did exploits. The second one, it is being taken away until the consummation. What that is, I don't know. I think it's until the marriage of Israel to his people at his return. Robert.
Well, you read 26 here. It says, of the people of the prince that shall come. Mm-hmm. Sounds like an army.
Yes.
The people of the prince. Mm-hmm. But he is in charge of the people, this prince.
Yes.
So you're pointing out the individual, but it could still be him in charge of the army.
And the reason why I say it like that is during the Maccabean revolt, the tax collector came for tribute. He was in charge, but he wasn't in charge of the army. Mm-hmm. Until Antiochus decreed them to take away the sanctuary because of the one religion. They didn't act on the tax collector's proclamation. They did it on Antiochus's. Yes, Larry.
And I was just thinking, in the year 70, I believe it was Vespasius and his son Titus who came against Rome, and Titus became emperor.
Yes, Titus was the he. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not crazy. I just want to make sure. Okay, this is what I saw. So, abomination of desolation that Yeshua mentions for us, not for them. When he mentioned it to the disciples, for them it was pointing to Maccabean revolt, Antiochus. For us, when we read it, it points back to 70 AD and Antiochus at the same time. In two different verses mentioned by Daniel.
Yeah.
Sounds about right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Okay. Again, this is my opinion. I'm just trying to unpack it in a way that everybody can kind of understand. Again, the key to this is until the consummation. Until the consummation, I think, is the marriage between Israel and the Lamb. At his return, those that are his will be raised up. This is referred to in Revelations 19, 6-9. We're not going to go there. But even after this, even talking of the historical context of Daniel 11 and Maccabean revolt, the historical context of Daniel 9, 27 and 70 AD, I still have questions as to whether there's more about this for the latter days, like Bob mentioned. In the latter days, how should we apply these scriptures of the abomination of desolation? Or, as I mentioned earlier, when we see an outpouring of the things that Yahweh hates, then there shall come one that will cause complete destruction. How do we apply it today? Because the verse says, or the interpreters or translator says, whosoever read this, let him understand. So it still does apply to us when we read it.
Right.
So we have to understand it. If we only look for an army to surround Jerusalem or a certain city, or if we only look, or a temple, a new temple, or if we only look for a desecration of the holy place, this new temple, are we looking for the right sign? Could be spiritual.
It could be the modern church.
Could be the modern church. It could be many things. But for us, we have to basically say, okay, what does Daniel say about the abomination of desolation? Because that's what Yeshua points us to.
It's going to be a physical thing. It's going to take in a physical place, but it will have spiritual.
Well, let's read it. Let's read it and see what. Yeah, let's read it and see what we understand about it first. All right.
And we have a type of that.
Let's read it, and then everybody can come up with their own opinion. I'm not going to say one or the other. I'm not.
46.
Yeah. So we're going to go to Daniel 11:45 next. We're not going to, the actual verse itself is in Daniel 12:11, but we have to start in Daniel 11:45 to get context. So we're not going to read all of this because I do not have enough time, but we're going to strive to get as much as possible. And for those that are hearing this on the CD, if it stops, please go to our website, YouTube, the Congregation of YHWH Irving, and hopefully you'll be able to see the rest of it because we're going to still stream until we get done with this. All right. The abomination of desolation is mentioned the last time in Daniel 12:11. And under this vision, it seems to be a little different as Daniel explains the vision of what most people reference is to the Antichrist, the beast, the false prophet, or even Satan himself. Whenever you're reading Daniel 12, a lot of people want to say, okay, that's talking about Antichrist. That's talking about Satan. And here's why most people believe. We start at Daniel 11:45. Daniel 11:45 says, and he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now, I'll stop there because who's he, and who is going to plant a palace on the holy mountain, but yet he, between the seas, yet he is going to come to an end, and nobody will be able to help him. This one is an easy one.
Ooh, pick me.
Yes, Q.
Reading that, I got Revelations chapter 13, verse 1.
Revelation 13, verse 1.
Yes, where it's talking about, I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, talking about the North King and the South King. So it's really, what I'm reading as reference. It is the king who will be attacked by a king of the south and a king of the north. The king of the north seems especially effective, leading what appears to be a coalition of many nations.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then that'll be referencing Ezekiel 38, verse 4, 11 through 15, and Joel chapter 2, verse 2 and 20.
Yeah, we're not going to go that deep just yet, but yeah, you're on the right track.
Okay.
In my mind, the person or the representative or spiritual being or, wickedness in high places, whatever you want to call it, they're going to attempt to set up a tabernacle or tabernacles of a palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, right? Yet that person or that being shall come to an end and none shall help him. That reminds me of, let's go to, you know what? Let's just start. 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Yes, Curtis.
Actually, you get quite a bit on it because his coalition of many nations is listed in Psalm 83.
Yeah. Let me go through this
Or
and then
do
we'll
that.
we'll circle back and keep that. And I think he mentioned you were talking about Ezekiel as well. Kind of points to this being, this person, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
2 Thessalonians 2:3. I mentioned this already before when I was talking about the temple being destroyed and the third temple being established. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes thee and exalts himself above all that is called Elohim, or that is worshipped, so that he, as Elohim, sitteth in the temple of Elohim, showing that himself that he is Elohim. Now I'll stop there. We know that there is someone that is going to try to set himself up. Yeah, 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4. So this person is going to actually try to say that he is Yahweh and set in a temple that is Yahweh. So where is that place going to be? In my mind, it should probably be between the seas and the glorious mountain, holy mountain. Where that is, I'm not going to speculate here. But Daniel 8 gives us an idea of what that might look like in the future. Let's go to Daniel 8:23. Daniel 8, verse 23. Here's where it gets kind of rocky for me. Daniel 8:23. We're talking about this person that's going to build a palace or tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glory of holy mountain. He shall come to an end, and none shall help him. Daniel 8:23 says, and in the latter times of their kingdom, going back to what Q just said about north and south and somebody else and multiple kingdoms coming in. And in the latter times of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty of the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. He shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. Reminds me of he shall come to an end, and none shall help him. After the transgressions or the abominations comes to a full, the adversary or whomever this figure is will exalt himself through peace and shall destroy many and make desolate. He shall come to an end, and he shall be broken without hand. I put that in there because that kind of references back to how Antiochus died, not in war and not by anger, but he died of the disease. All right. So one last one, Isaiah 14:12. Isaiah 14:12 says, and Isaiah 14:12 through 15. We know these verses because it talks about Satan himself, the adversary himself. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will exalt myself on my throne above the stars of Elohim. I will sit also upon the mountain of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the cloud. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. And I'll stop there. There's a lot of different parallels and similarities that point to a future deceiver who will perform abominations of desolations in the holy place. We just need to understand what they will look like before we start running for the hills, is my comment here. Because what I am seeing here from Daniel 11:45 is there's going to be someone that tries to set up some sort of place and sit in that place, which is going to be, says, on the glorious holy mountain, whatever that might be, and say that he is Elohim, actually going to say in his heart that he is Elohim, sit on the mount of the congregation, but he is going to be brought down and broken and not by hand. And I'm assuming by Yeshua. So I'll kind of stop there before I move on because that was a lot also. Yes.
So one of the things we have to appreciate in times when the Jewish people abandoned and prostituted themselves to the nations, Yahweh allowed the first temple to be destroyed. They rebuilt the temple at Yahweh's instruction and rededicated themselves as a nation to follow, but they fell away again. And so by the time Joshua was there, here he was teaching them. He came in Yahweh's name, and they rejected him. And even at his death, remember, they said, let Barabbas go, you know. And when they pointed out and said, well, he's your king. And they said, we have no king but Caesar. Then they said, let his blood fall on us and our children. And at the very death of Joshua, remember what happened. The skies were dark, just like night. There was a great earthquake, and even the veil between the holy and the most holy was rent in two, okay? And there was never after that any sign of Yahweh's presence in that temple after that.
Right, exactly.
And Yahweh had abandoned those people at that point. He was turning his favor to those who would follow his dear son Joshua.
Right.
And so that temple was ultimately destroyed, and all the records of the Jewish nation was destroyed. No one could point to a scripture, to a document today and say, I'm a Levi. This is my lineage. That's why the different ones, like the apostle said, don't fret over genealogies. So with this being said, we know there will probably be some sort of a third temple, okay?
You notice when I said and read this, I said a tabernacle of his palace.
Yeah.
I didn't say a temple.
I have
Yeah.
a clue what
Some kind of
So,
tabernacle.
yeah, I'm glad you made a point to that.
So that being said, it's not Yahweh's. There will be a fourth temple, I believe.
And that goes back to my point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're thinking of when Yeshua says, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. This new temple or this new palace is not going to be a holy place. So let's get our mind set right of what could this look like. Someone sitting themselves in a place, calling it holy, and it's not. Yeah.
Could be manifesting great miracles, just like Pharaoh's magic practices,
Yes.
priests who threw down the sticks and turned to snakes, okay?
Yeah.
They could have voices coming from the mercy seat, but it's not Yahweh.
Yeah, and it might be on the mountain of the congregation, it might be in the glorious holy mountain, it might be in the place that it should be, but it's not going to be the temple. Yes, Bob.
Second Maccabees, second chapter, starting at verse 4.
Second Maccabees, second chapter, starting in verse 4.
Yes, I'm not gonna read it. The Ark of the Covenant was buried. It was put in a cave. It's going to come out. I sincerely believe that. I spent a lot of money and a lot of time looking for it over in Jerusalem. So if Second Maccabees, the second chapter, contains the fact that Jeremiah hid it and it will be found, that will go on the Temple Mount or somewhere.
Yeah, something to that effect.
Something to that effect.
The adversary has to do not a mirror, but a copy or a replica of what what the adversary has to stand up a copy of what Yahweh predicts. He cannot do the exact same thing.
Well, if the actual tabernacle is discovered and it's still usable, can you imagine what that would do?
Whoa.
So that's my opinion,
We'll have to talk
and
about
I'm
that
gonna
one.
stick with it.
Yeah, go for it. We'll talk about that one. But
All right.
Going back to what Larry said is, if we are holding true to Daniel 11, 45, and whoever this is, this being or person that's going to actually set up a place in the glorious mountain, holy mountain, and it's going to be a replica. It's not going to be the same thing. And so let's read the next verse, Daniel 12:1 now, because we've read Daniel 11:45 to set the stage on Daniel 12:1. Not going to read all the way down to Daniel 11. I'm going to skip in the interest of time, but I have to put this verse in there because this tells us the time frame in which all of this is being talked about. Daniel 12 verse 1 says, "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time." I'll stop there because Yeshua mentions these same exact words in Matthew 24:21, and we're going to get to that later. We're talking about a time of trouble, tribulation, that has never been since the nation has been determined. And it goes on to say, "And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." And I'll stop right there. So we know we're talking about a future time after tribulation when everybody that's written in the book will be actually delivered. So not going to go too much in there. I just wanted to give a actual time frame of what we're speaking about, because let's jump down to Daniel 12:9 now. Daniel 12 verse 9. And then we're going to close this out because this is the last account that Daniel mentions of the abomination of desolation. Daniel 12 verse 9 says, "And he said," and this is the angel that was talking to Daniel that was standing by the river, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." So let's make very specific of when this will happen. And verse 10 says, "Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. But go thou thy way till the end be, and thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days." And I'll stop there. This mention of the abomination of desolation gives us the time it happens and then the time frame in which these things will happen, which will be a period of 1,290 days. Not going to jump into what that time frame is. Yahweh knows. But in this situation, when Yeshua is telling us now to look back at the abomination of desolation, and when we see it, we should look back at the time of the Maccabees, what happened, the time of 70 AD, what happened, and in the future, when the abomination of desolation was set up in 70 AD, there's going to be a long period of time when all of these other things happen of someone trying to say that they are Elohim, and it's going to be brought down and broken without hands. That's how we should look at the abomination of desolation, in my mind. Questions? Yes, it starts the clock. It's not, in my mind, my opinion, Daniel 12:11, I'll read it again. "And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away," meaning the daily sacrifice was taken away until the consummation. And that's why I say in 9:27, daily sacrifice and abomination was set up until the consummation. This is confirming from the time that it was taken away and the abomination was set up, there's going to be a time frame when all of these other events happen to where someone will try to build a palace on the holy mountain, call himself Elohim, say in his heart he is Elohim, but he will be brought down and broken without hand, so we don't have to do anything. And all of this will happen around the time of tribulation or after, and all of Yahweh's people that call on his name will be delivered. Does that make sense? All right, couple of hands. Larry?
Yeah, it's just a tidbit of interesting fact, but I don't know the exact date. From somewhere in the year 66 until the year 70, because Jerusalem finally fell on September the 8th, the year 70, it was close to 42 months.
Yeah, fun fact. That's why I don't even get into the, what does that number mean? Don't know. I don't even attempt to
42
try.
months, that's 3.5 years.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, I know it's 3.5 years, but I don't try to figure it out in the time frame of Yahweh. It's just a different thing. It's above my mind, and I'm above my pay grade, and I'm okay with that. All right, so did I explain that a little bit, or did I totally confuse everybody? So I'll rehash it if I need to.
There's a series of sermons in there somewhere.
Right, there's a lot, right? So I wrote here, my final thought is, the abomination of desolation holds profound significance for believers, whether it's interpreting historical events like we just went over, whether it's based on a symbol of spiritual apostasy, which I ain't even talk about. Some say the abomination of desolation, since we are the temple, we're watching the abomination of desolation that happens in Yahweh's people, the falling away that's mentioned of in 2 Thessalonians, or whether it's talking about the future events warning of there is someone that's going to come and try to replicate all of this, and we need to watch for that. Now, whether we should flee for the hills in those situations, that's up to Yahweh. But I just want to focus on the abomination of desolation. When we read it, those that read understand there is an older event that he was telling them to watch out for. There is a 70 AD event that we should be looking out for. And if we're going to think about it in a future event, let's really know what it means and what we should be looking for before we start running for the hills.
Mission accomplished.
Yes. All right. Robert's itching. Bob and then Curtis.
Well, I'm having one of those minutes. I waited too long. Go ahead. If I think
Okay.
about it, I'll raise my hand.
Curtis, did you have anything?
Well, in terms of,
Yeah.
in terms of abominations, because that's like, we got, think, if it's the spirit leaving a temple, we're given a whole series of description what's going on in Ezekiel 8.
Yes, and that's what you were saying earlier. I don't know if we have time to go through that, but highly encourage everybody to read Ezekiel 8. And that's when
But these were being done by the priest.
he was being told to see what's happening in the temple, and
Yes.
that's why his spirit left. Right. My final thoughts also is, abomination of desolation is an enduring relevance, underscoring the need for us to be vigilant, for us to be faithful, and unwavering commitment to the teachings of Messiah, so that we are not deceived, that we don't think of ourselves more than we ought we know exactly what's going to happen, and that we just stay continuously ready for Yahshua's return. Let's not wait until we see the signs before we get right with Yahweh. Let's do that now. All around us, constant. So, yeah, let's get right now. All right,
The
Go
only
ahead.
thing I was gonna talk about is Revelation 20 verse 4, where it talks about those that are beheaded. There's gonna be a lot of nasty stuff gonna happen to us also
Yes.
during this period of time, so. But this has really been a good study.
yeah, stay steadfast regardless. So let's not look for something, a city that's being encompassed by the army before we get right. All right, that's all I got. We'll get started up in a few minutes with Curtis with the main message. Hallelujah. Right.